Alright mates, how's it going? In today's video, I'm covering Fall of the Twilight's Hammer and the Fractured Accord from Chronicle Volume 3. So let's go! Even after the recent Elemental and Naga assaults, the Alliance and Horde's power struggles continued. But they at least now realised that it would probably be a good idea to not keep ignoring what was happening to the rest of the world. Previously, they believed that the Twilight's Hammer cult was nothing more than a bunch of crazy people running around licking windows and stuff. But now they knew that the cult was highly organised and extremely dangerous. They spread across the land like rats and would only grow in power if left alone. So both factions launched a counterattack against the Twilight's Hammer, targeting its most prominent holdings. And this culminated in a strike on the Twilight Highlands. The sky was full of airships that were full of soldiers. The Horde and Alliance didn't exactly work together in this assault though. Although they had the same goal, both sides also fancied taking the land for themselves afterwards. The Alliance buddied up with the region's local wild hammer dwarf population. It took time to win them over. They were an independent bunch, but they gained their support eventually and it proved pretty invaluable in the battles ahead. Also the Red Dragonflight helped them out, most notably during an assault on Grimbatol, because they had a bit of a grudge against that place. The Horde rekindled their relationship with the Dragonmaw. They'd not really been mates since the end of the Second War, but War Chief Garrosh Hellscream convinced them to join his horde and promised them blood and glory. Also, Garona appeared. Chronicle doesn't actually explain why she's no longer at Theramore. There's a run of comics that do, but I'm pretty sure they ain't canon, considering they're about Medan. But she'd not given up her quest to destroy Cho'Gul and his followers. Although she'd not yet sworn herself to this new horde, she did fight by their side. And she was pretty bloody ruthless, painting her daggers with the blood of anyone who wore the Twilight's Hammer sigil. And the Horde gets the credit for attacking the cult's seat of power, the Bastion of Twilight. Champions cut their way through the Citadel and eventually found themselves face to face with Cho'Gul. But the two-headed ogre didn't cheese it, he embraced his fate. Despite all the recent defeats he'd suffered, he believed the cult's goal had been achieved. The hour of Twilight was inevitable. There's nothing you assholes can do about it. And the heroes were like, yeah, whatevs mate, and plunged their blades into his black heart. The fall of Cho'Gul and the Bastion of Twilight kinda broke the cult's strength, but it endured. Many cultists still remained active across the world, and Archbishop Benedictus filled the now empty leadership position. He decided to change his name for reals this time, but it wasn't a pyromancer. His new name was the Twilight Father, which is a shit name. Meanwhile, in a completely unrelated story, there was another culture in the world that had suffered pretty terribly from the cataclysm. Earthquakes and tidal waves caused a lot of damage to an island called Zandalar. Not only did these natural disasters awaken an enemy from their past, but it was also just another bloody ball ache for the Zandalari to have to deal with, because they've been having a shit time for thousands of years. War, famine, not having a vast empire anymore. Life was hard, man. A mysterious prophet called Zul arose to help his people. He'd had some visions of their home sinking, and so he urged peeps to abandon Zandalar and seek a new destiny. He was aware of the political turmoil going on in many nations across the world and figured it was a good time to reunite the scattered troll tribes and re-establish themselves as Azeroth's main power, like the good old days. And the Zandalari's ruler, King Rastakhan, was like, shut your goddamn mouth. He wasn't a big fan of the idea of leaving Zandalar, but he gave the prophet permission to take the tribe's fleet, and anyone who wanted to go with them was welcome to. Many troll tribes across the world were excited when word from this Zul bloke arrived, the most notable of which were the Gurubashi and Amani trolls. With the Zandalari's guidance, they steadily began rebuilding their nations and readying themselves for war, for like the third time or something. Zul also reached out to Vol'jin and his Darkspear trolls, and for a prophet, this was a really dumb thing to do. Not only did Vol'jin tell him to piss off, but he also informed a whole bunch of Horde and Alliance champions of this new threat. Vol'jin wasn't as hostile to the Alliance as Garrosh. He believed there was wisdom in cooperation, and he wasn't wrong, because those champions worked together and crushed the Ascendant Troll Empire. But this wasn't over for Zul. He was determined to find ways to assert troll dominion over the world. Anywho, back to the Twilight Highlands. During their time in the region, the Horde and Alliance were a bit shocked to see Deathwing himself appear in the skies. But he was soon distracted, because Alexstrasza arrived. She wasn't happy at all with the amount of death the cataclysm had caused, and when she realised that Deathwing was responsible for it, she knew that was only the beginning. He needed to be stopped and stuff. So the two dragons clashed in the skies above Twilight Highlands in a storm of fire and scales. Although she got a few good jabs in and wounded the Black Dragon aspect, Deathwing still won, and Alexstrasza was forced to cheese it. But this troubled Deathwing. He'd only narrowly managed to beat her. What if Isira and Nosdormu had been at her side? Yeah, sure, the other remaining dragon aspects seemed harmless and in disarray, but that won't last forever. If those jerks return to their former power, then he's screwed. So Deathwing decided it was probably a good idea to take them out before that happened. So he rallied an army of Twilight dragons to his side and then buggered off, leaving the Twilight Highlands. And in turn, he left the Twilight's hammer and Cho'Gul to their fates, which I already talked about like 3 minutes ago. To be honest, Deathwing didn't really give a shit. Soon enough, an opportunity to strike at the dragon aspects presented itself. Alexstrasza called a brain trust meeting at Wyrmrest Temple. She'd also realised how close she was to besting Deathwing, and that uniting the dragon aspects was the way forward. But the meeting was a bloody disaster. Nosdormu didn't even show up, and no one knew where the balls he was anymore. Ysera came, but she's about as useful as tits on a fish. 2 blue dragons, Kalecgos and Aragos, arrived to talk about the blue dragon flight. Malygos was dead, so they needed a new leader. Now Kalecgos is wise and even-tempered, and Aragos is a twat that just so happens to be Malygos' son. So it's not exactly a difficult choice, but of course there needs to be some drama first. Aragos blamed Alexstrasza for his father's death, and made it quite clear that he had no intention of forgiving her. A heated argument erupted between the dragons, and then Deathwing's forces attacked. Twilight dragons appeared out of nowhere and assaulted the temple. But what Alexstrasza and her allies didn't realise was that this was a diversion. Beneath the temple were a number of enchanted sanctums that housed each of the dragonfly's eggs. And these sanctums were currently being infiltrated by Twilight's hammer cultists. They shrouded the clutches with void energies and gradually started transforming the unhatched eggs into more Twilight dragons. And their ritual would have worked if it wasn't for that pesky Coriolstras. He discovered what was going on, but it was too late to cleanse the eggs of this filthy void corruption. So he drew on his own life essence and bloody exploded. Enchanted fire filled the sanctums, destroying every egg and cultist in them. The blast shook Wyrmrest Temple to its foundations, and shortly afterwards, the Twilight dragons started to retreat. Unfortunately, when Alexstrasza and her allies investigated the sanctums, they drew completely the wrong conclusion as to what had actually happened. Rather than viewing Coriolstras as a hero who had sacrificed himself, they viewed him as a jerk who'd fallen under Deathwing's sway and destroyed the eggs. And this apparent betrayal, plus all of the death, was enough to finally break Alexstrasza. She was overcome with grief and just buggered off. And with her departure, the other dragons slowly abandoned the temple as well. Whatever hope there may have been of uniting the dragonflights was no more. So even though Deathwing's actual plan of corrupting some eggs completely failed, everything turned out dandy for him. And we're leaving it there! In the next Volume 3 video, Thrall stuff, Ysera stuff, Nosdormu stuff, Kalecgos stuff, then if we can squeeze it in, more Ragnaros stuff. If you enjoyed this video, like, subscribe, all of that bollocks, and all that's left to say is, thanks for watching, and see ya!